Welcome to Litteraturhuset this afternoon. Welcome to you who have come here, and welcome to those of you who are following us on the live stream. This is our annual Anne Politkovskaja-seminar. And this year has a particular significance. The editor of Anna's newspaper, Novaja Gazeta, has been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, a recognition of the extremely important work Anna, her colleagues, did and still keep doing. This year, it is also 10 years since Anna was brutally killed outside of her own home, and it also means 10 years of impunity for those who ordered her murder. Anna Politkovskaya was killed because she exposed the truth about the extreme human rights violations in Chechnya. Since then, many more journalists have been killed for exposing truths about today's Russia. And tomorrow, the Norwegian Helsinki Committee awards the Sakharovs Freedom Award to Yuri Dmitriev, a historian who dedicated his time and life to expose the atrocities of the Stalin era, digging out bones from the mass graves. And he did that to provide documentation, to restore the dignity of the victims, and bring closure to the relatives of those victims. These are crimes of the past, but Dmitriev has still been convicted to 13 years of prison on trumped-up charges. Yuri is a political prisoner, the same way as the Stalin era kept political prisoners. Now, organizations and individuals are officially labeled foreign agents. Like in Soviet times, Russian people are wary of contact with foreigners. That's something new. Security services are represented in all Russian public institutions. The judiciary is used to implement the reactions against those who speak the truth. Other repercussions are simpler extrajudicial, like the murder of opposition leader Boris Nemtsov and the poisoning of Alexei Navalny. So let us ask, is history repeating itself? Has Russia turned into a KGB-ruled state, which is with its emphasis of control and repression, rather than the welfare of the people of Russia? And why is it that Russia never seriously dealt with the violent past, even after the end of the Soviet Union, when it easily could have rid itself with that past? With us today, we have an excellent expert to give us some answer to those questions. We have Anna Politkovskaja, who is a journalist with an independent regional media outlet, Sever.Realii, Reality of the North. Yes. She covers the traces of Stalinist repression in northwest Russia, but also the persecution today of those who try to restore the justice of the victims or to write about them. And Anna will receive the Sakharovs Freedom Award tomorrow on behalf of Yuri Dmitriev in Oslo Town Hall. Andrei Soldatov is very famous. He's a journalist, author, and one of Russia's most recognized experts on Russia's security state. You have written several books, and one of them, The Red Web, for instance, you demonstrate how secret services are an unbroken line from the Soviet Union to Putin's Russia. And Inna Sangadzhieva, she heads the Norwegian Helsinki Committee Russia department program and has followed the development of civil society, and human rights in Russia since Soviet times. A dear colleague, and I welcome you all to this discussion. We will have a conversation. And for those who have questions in this audience, unfortunately we're not able to include you online, but I aim to leave some time towards the end for question. Anna, you have used the Norwegian scientist Johan Galtung, his idea of the triangle of violence to describe modern Russia. And even though you are in Norway, not everybody knows of the triangle of violence. Could you explain what that is and how that relates to Russia today?
Yes, thank you, Berit. Well, yes, when I was thinking what can I tell today during this discussion, I remembered this idea of Johan Galtung, and I thought that everybody in Norway knows that the idea of triangle of violence. And why does this came to my mind? Because I think that violence is the best term that describes current situation in Russia. The idea is that Galtung divides violence into visible and invisible, visible violence is direct violence, and this is, for example, what was happening earlier this year on the Russian streets, when lots of people protesting for freedom of Alexei Navalny, and they were beaten by police and were put in put in police vans, and they managed to stay there during a long time without food, water, and toilet, and direct violence is what actually happens with Alexei Navalny himself, from poisoning to his arrest, and direct violence is tortures and rapes in a Russian prison. Which were some of episodes recently disclosed by Gulagu.net network. And it is horrible. I mean, I cannot even watch without my tears, but when I have to do it as a journalist, I force myself to absorb these horrors. And this is what direct violence is, and it is terrible, but what is even more terrible in Russia, in addition to this direct violence, is silence around this violence and the approval of the violence. And this silence is a result of cultural violence. This is when violence became the culture of violence in a society. And cultural violence normalizes and justifies direct violence. This is what Galtung's idea. And nowadays the main assistance of authorities in this process of normalizing violence are the media in Russia, journalists. Not all of them, of course, but only those who are part of a so-called propaganda machine. And after all, what do the normal people watch on TV, on Russian TV? What do they see? And it turns out that the ones protesting on the streets, they are criminals. They are bandits. They are hooligans. And it comes out that it is normal that police beats them. And because otherwise they could destroy everything around. And I will just read a quote by Vladimir Putin, said in December 2019, one first threw a plastic cup at a government official, no reaction. When one threw a plastic bottle, again, no reaction. When one will throw a glass bottle or stone, when they will start shooting and smashing the shops, we must not let this happen. And they didn't, as we see. And also, people consider tortures in prison as normal, because prisoners in Russia, they are not humans, they are kind of garbage, criminals, scums, and they can and should be beaten also. And according to Levada polls, every second Russian believes that Alexei Navalny was not poisoned by Russian security services. And the third believes that he is an extremist and that he is imprisoned for a reason. So seriously, the idea that Navalny is not a good guy is enough for most of Russians to justify his being in prison right now. Fortunately, not all of us, not all people are watching TV, Russian TV, and not everyone works in it. Well, when I say fortunately, I'm not sure that it's a huge fortune and happiness for those who do not justify violence. After all, what happens to those who try to resist the process of normalizing violence in Russia? Some are sentenced, some became foreign agents, some foreign agents are in prison, some are waiting for some other option. And for the last 2 years, I've been working for the project Sever.Realii, or the realities on the north. This is a project of Russian branch of Radio Freedom, Radio of Europe, and Radio Liberty, so lots of names. And in addition to the fact that our media is already foreign agent, for the last 2 years, during this year, most of my colleagues, they became foreign agents personally. And currently there are 88 foreign agents in the list of Ministry of Justice of Russia, and 56 of them, they are individuals, journalists, activists, lawyers, and there's even one poet. And can we call it violence? I believe so. And is it possible to say that society treats it normally and justifies this ugly law and other stupid laws in Russia? Unfortunately, yes. So, and this was my brief and simplified overview of Russian current situation overall and with Russian journalism shortly. Yes.
Thank you. I want to catch up on foreign agents, because for foreign agents we have heard about for several years now. But we have mostly heard about that related to organizations, that now individuals are being put on this list of foreign agents. What does that mean exactly? Either of you who would like to respond to that?
I can respond shortly, because one of my best friends, they became foreign agents, and I know that how do they feel about that, and it is like very bad, very bad situation. Yes, they have to send reports to Minister of Justice once for 3 months, I guess, to write every sum that they spend in their lives, buying cookies, or coffee, or diapers for kids. And they should also write this crazy, what is a sentence? It's not even a one sentence or one. No, that their attention, I am a foreign agent, now you can talk with me. And also it is a big pressure inside of everyone, because for example, my friend, he lives in Petrozavodsk. This is a small city in Karelia, in northwest of Russia, and he is one foreign agent for whole Karelia. And he was like desperate. I don't know how to explain it. He felt lost when he realized, when he saw his name in this list. And I think that this demoralization, the main idea of authorities, according to this law, they want to make feel us lonely, desperate to stop doing what we do. But I hope that they will fail with this, because I think we'll find a support.
To pick up on the justification for the Nobel Peace Prize to two independent journalists, how would you describe the role of independent journalism, especially in your region, and how has it changed over the last few years?
Is it for me? Well, this is a very hard question, actually, because I do not live in Russia anymore, and this is like a challenge for me right now to. Well, that was a very tricky situation when we knew that Dmitrij Muratov. Why Alexei?
Because of Navalny, maybe.
Maybe, yes. Why Alexei? Dmitrij Muratov got this Nobel Prize, and which was a very, very happy start of the day. And my Facebook friends, they were writing like, wow, hooray, we have won. This is a huge story for all independent journalism right now, and we feel support from Europe and from worldwide. And at the end of the day, when Minister of Justice published a new list of new foreign agents, it was, they ruined this day. They tried to do this. So this is how we live in journalism society right now. So at the morning we are happy and we are celebrating. At the end we are drinking a wine because no foreign agents came. So this is my words.
Yes, and we talked about the silent approval of the government, and also to quite a large extent by society at large. I mean, 50% think that Navalny is guilty. If violence is used in prison, it is okay. Inna, why do you think people accept that? Is that lack of information? Is it structural, cultural, or what do you think?
Well, I would not agree with the fact that they accept that per se, because we have to see on the background of Russia's development, historical development. And here we can see a conflict between the regime and society, and this conflict actually has happened through 90s and with perestroika. And back to then, we saw how society has started to awaken. At the same time, the regime would like to get back to status quo and not change anything. What is interesting is that almost all sociological surveys which have been conducted, for instance, last year when the constitution has been changed, there has also been people were also asked about, you want to have a change for this constitution or not, like reform, and then the answers was around 50-50. But those who kind of agree, they're not like agree. We have to deal with Russia's authoritarian regime, and more even as information autocracy, like used by Daniel Treisman, is a scientist and political scientist, which gives us a description of the regime which wants to take back a monopoly of history, monopoly to own people, own information, own the story, so that it's possible to falsify it, and it's possible to give another kind of alternative story. But what is changing is that society actually tried to really compete it. And it has also happened from the 90s, when suddenly personal stories, stories of repressions, as in this case of Yuri Dmitriev, who actually graved the people, and gave them names. Suddenly they compete the official story. And what do you do with that? And in the situation with internet, social media, suddenly people get more than access on what actually happened. And the organization as Memorial, where Yuri Dmitriev also has been working as the head of Karelian branch, is also an example where documentation of stories, getting back to where we are, and the story of violence. Why do we actually accept violence? Maybe it's because almost 1 million people had to be murdered and tortured. Maybe because 6 million of people also were arrested. Maybe because they're afraid. And this fear which is there, this is also a symbolic power which today's regime is using, which are coming from FSB and KGB.
And that gives a cue to you, huh?
Yeah.
FSB and KGB is your field of work. You claim that the power and influence of the secret services is unbroken from Soviet times up until now. What do you mean by that? How do you explain?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's not my first time here. It's always great to be in this room. I've been writing about Russia security services for more than 20 years, since 1999. And that's why I can trace how things changed for the FSB and within the FSB. And yes, the FSB always had a very big role in Russian society, even under Yeltsin, starting at least in 1995, when they got the name the FSB, which means Federal Security Service, and the definition of security in Russian society traditionally was extremely broad. It's about everything from food security to technical security, digital security, national security, whatever. And once agency was put in charge. But what was always interesting for me was the perception of the FSB by people from within. And it's quite interesting that in the beginning, in the late 1990s and the beginning of the 2000s, people inside the FSB, they like to compare themselves to the KGB. They openly said that we are successors to the KGB. They shared, of course, the same legacy, the same big names like Yuri Andropov. Sometimes they have literally the same terminology. And of course, from the beginning, it was quite clear that there are huge differences between the KGB and the FSB. KGB was omnipowerful, but was still under control of the party. The FSB, on the contrary, from the beginning, had no control from anybody except Vladimir Putin. And it's actually, if you live in such a big country, you cannot exercise an effective control if you're just talking about one guy controlling such a big organization, being active in such a big country. The second thing which is important is that Putin likened himself to Andropov, because Andropov was the chairman of the KGB and became the head of the Soviet state. And then you have Putin, who was the head of the FSB and became the Russian president. But actually, this comparison is not correct. Andropov was a party official. He was not a trained KGB officer. Putin is the very first guy who was trained inside the KGB who became the chief of the state. And that, of course, changes so many things in the country. But quite interesting, these people never, ever compared themselves to Stalin's secret services. There was a very clear line, like, yes, We love many things within the KGB. We still believe it was a great spying organization. Stalin's security services? No, of course not. These guys were thugs, they were brutal, they killed lots of people. No. We have nothing.
Stalin's secret services is what is referred to as
NKVD or GPU, these kind of organizations.
Right.
So there was always this line. What we see now, and it's completely astonishing, that right now, maybe it started, I would say, 4 years ago, we got the people inside of the FSB talking about themselves as the direct successors to Stalin's secret services. And there should be some explanation for that. I find only 3, to be honest. One is that starting in 2015, Putin decided that repression, selective repression at least, is the best way to control the society. And I just wanted to remind our audience that sometimes you hear all these gloomy stories about people being prosecuted and sent to jail, but it's not always about the opposition and activists and journalists. It's also about Russian elites. It's about Russian bureaucracy. We have governors sent to jail, we have ministers sent to jail, we have people in the banking system sent to jail. So it's not only about political threat, it's also about how to control your society, how to run your country. You send people to jail, whatever. They might be ministers, they might be government officials, nobody cares. Actually, they have FSB generals sent to jail to send a message to the FSB that everybody should be under control of Putin. And of course, now the FSB was put in charge of conducting these repressions, and that is very direct line to Stalin's secret services, because they were the instrument of repression. The second thing is that what we see now is the militarization of the Russian society. It's a very new thing, to be honest. Sometimes we remember all these stories from the Soviet past that the military were always extremely important in Russian society. Yes, that's true, but they never played an independent role. Now we see that changing. Now the Russian military have a say about Russian ideology, about Russian history, about how to educate our children. We have this youth army, we have the military saying how to teach kids in these schools. They dig up mass graves in Karelia to present their version of the history. And they just build the biggest church to make a point that they are actually a very big force in Russian society. And because Russian ideology is always about military history, that is also important for the FSB, because now they say, we are not only successors to the KGB, but we also saved the country along with the military during the Second World War. And that makes them happy, and that makes them accepting the idea that, well, actually, now, yes, we have the name of the FSB, but actually people back then in the 40s, they did a great job. They also helped to protect our country during the war. And we have lots of movies, TV series to this effect, and they're all promoting this story. And finally, the third thing, which might be even more important. When I met people from the FSB in the late 1990s, all of them had this psychological trauma. They experienced it, how the Soviet Union collapsed, how Gorbachev accepted the idea of reforming the KGB, how the KGB was split in several parts, how so many people were promoted to be head of the new Russian security services. And in 2 years, sometimes in a year, they lost their positions. So they remembered this experience that actually lots of things could happen to them if something changed on the very top. And that gives them some horizon. They understand that actually, well, you cannot rely too much on your leadership. Something might happen to you, because something might happen to your leadership. Unfortunately, what we have now, we have the same guy in charge of the country for more than 20 years, which means that lots of people inside of the Russian security services, they grew up having only one chief of the security service, only one supreme leader, Putin. So they don't have this experience of the 1990s, And they believe that actually nothing could happen to them. And one final point. When I walked to this FSB museum in 1999, and they have this exhibition, very, very interesting exhibition inside. They had a stand, they have a special room about Stalin's repressions. And the idea was always to say that Stalin's repressions killed a lot of people inside of security services. So people in the KGB and as a result, people in the 1990s who served in the new Russian security services, they remembered only one thing about Stalin's repressions, that Stalin at some point attacked them, and that they didn't like, and they didn't want that to happen again. People in the 2000s and 2010s, they don't remember that. They don't go to this museum. They don't remember that Stalin actually attacked NKVD and killed so many people, starting from Yagoda in Yezhov and Beria and all that. And they really believe that Putin always would protect them. So they have this very narrow mindset about what is going on and what could happen to them. They feel very safe. And that gave them more power and more, I would say, make them more adventurous than, say, the same people in the same positions 20 or just 10 years ago.
But what does that say about Putin? I mean, if he relies on security forces, like his own FSB, but I mean, Putin is fairly popular. He was very popular, and he could have built his foundation on so many other things.
Yeah, right.
So why did he choose to build his foundation on FSB security services? Because it also makes him vulnerable in a way.
You're absolutely right, and actually he failed several times because he made this mistake. You're absolutely right. In the 1990s and in the early 2000s, he gave these people enormous powers, and actually he made them bigger than security services. Remember, in the 2000s, they called themselves not the KGB, but the new nobility. The idea was that they are the new nobility of Russia, they're in charge of everything. But actually, what Putin expected them to do is that if he would face some political crisis in the country or abroad, these people would help him. They would run to his office and provide with some solution. The problem was that these people were not that smart. And in many cases, they failed. The most spectacular failure was actually in 2014 in Kiev, and they were actually in Kiev. They were close to Yanukovych, and they missed how this guy decided to run off. And that was the biggest mistake the FSB ever did. So Putin needed to come to this problem personally, and he came up with the idea of annexation of Crimea, not the FSB. So in the end of the day, about 2015, Putin became quite, I would say, not pissed off, but sort of he understood that his idea of the new nobility actually didn't work. So what he decided to do, he decided the FSB to become what he experienced back in the 1980s, the KGB. And he stripped the FSB of some functions they used to have. For instance, I remember the time when they talked about developing a new national idea. There is not such a talk now these days in Moscow. Well, nobody expects the FSB to develop a new national idea. But what he did, he decided that back then in the 1980s, the KGB was only one thing, the instrument for repression, and that's enough. So he gave them that, which means actually that you're absolutely right. He doesn't understand that this model actually has its weaknesses. The problem is that it's the only model he remembered from his time in the Soviet Union, and he actually believed that it worked quite well, which is a really strange and paradoxical thing to say, because, look, in 1991, this system failed the Soviet Union, right? The KGB was supposed to save the Soviet Union, and it failed. So why to still believe that it was the most powerful, the most interesting, the most intelligent organization in the country? But he believes in that.
When the security services now become more and more violent, as we have heard, why is that? You have explained that they're feeling more confident, they understand their power, but is it also related to other movements in society where there is more resistance, where civil society is on some areas are becoming more active, or is that the romantic idea we have here in Norway?
No, I think to some extent the problem is that these days lots of people love to compare Russia with China or Iran. There is a huge difference. We had this period of 1990s, and China doesn't have this experience. We have this experience of being free for at least 10 years, or if you count perestroika for 13 years. And that means a lot. You have a generation of people who remember how they were free, how they can act on their own and take their decisions. And it's not so easy to roll back if you have this memory in your society. In the 1980s, when the KGB was still alive and the Soviet Union was still alive, remember that the main job of the KGB was just to remind people who still remembered Stalin what could happen to them if they got back to the Stalin methods, and that would be enough. People would be sufficiently afraid. But these days, nobody remembers Stalin. Instead, people remember the 1990s. And to pacify these people, these new generations, you need to be more violent, and that's exactly what is going on.
So giving the Stalin treatment to make them remember it.
Something like that.
Inna, after national trauma, like the apartheid of South Africa, the genocide of Rwanda, an important aspect has been reconciliation processes, where history is owned, and recognizing the wrongdoings of injustices of the past is a central element of that. And this never happened in Russia after the Stalin terror. And many of the archives of the Stalin period, they were opened during the 90s. Now they're closed again. We have heard how school books and history books are being amended. So Putin has stopped more or less this public conversation. We have another Russian here visiting us. He said that, but it hasn't stopped because there are always millions talking about it. But that's because Russia is a huge country. So whatever it is, there are always millions doing it still, you know. But still, there is this attempt of silencing the discussion. And why is it that Russia is so afraid of its own history? And why is the history falsified?
Well, I first would like to comment on your replique that this process hasn't started. I think it has started in the 90s. I think when, at least my family, I remember that period as well, very well, these 10 years of freedom, kind of. And when, like, my grandmother put Lenin on each wall, and the next week, suddenly, I got the news that the whole Kalmyks were deported to Siberia, and that was not even talked in the family during Soviet times. So this change was, for me, shocking, because it was. And again, it started the process of understanding who we are, the identity, and it's not possible to close each and one family. It's not possible to stop this eagerness of particular families to understand where their family come from and what they go through. And I think, again, back to Yuri Dmitriev, is also a very important example to understand who we are. And I think the need of, it's not the society's need to falsify the story, it's the need of the regime to keep on to keep on telling them about the past, because the past is our future. But people don't want to go back to the future. They, as Andrei said, it's not, they have, the new generation, they don't know who Stalin was. When I was in Volgograd last time, like 2 years ago, I saw in Volgograd this, you know, funny souvenirs with Stalin. I mean, you can even find this, you know, a key, you know, with the Stalin, and he is not in vodka with Stalin. I mean, it's not serious anymore. But the serious thing is that the violence and I think also that impunity is also the reason why people in security services think that they can just continue. At the same time, we see that as society is opening up, more information are coming because a lot of people understand what kind of regime they're dealing with. And we know it from our work with Belarus, when suddenly society understood that how violent actually the regime is. And for many, it will be a kind of awakening again. So, and that's why the regime needs to have enemies. They need to have internal enemies and external enemies, and they need to point them. And in Russia, there are 4 lists of foreign agents, and this is also in organizations and media, but at the same time, civil society is coming, and they do put these people in the prison. We have examples like during the first half year of this year, there are 250 representatives from law enforcement bodies put in jail for torture. And that's for society to it gives an opportunity that it's possible to get justice in the courts. And it's possible then to demand this justice to happen. And it's possible then to do something with it in different regions. Because, again, what happens in Moscow is something different happening in Dagestan, in Yekaterinburg, in Chelyabinsk, in Khabarovsk. And we also see the protests also are growing. And it's also a picture where we also see this the situation with the coronavirus now, where people are every day dying, thousands of people. And it's also go back to this question of value of life, what Yuri Dmitriev tries to get back, value of life, because in history, like historically, life of a person is just a method. You can just use it, you know, you can just, and that's how state has been operating. So I see this actually is this huge change which is going on, and because society is trying to resist, the more reaction we see. And this is also a kind of interaction and conflict, we see that. And here we need help. I mean, Russian society needs help from the West to pay attention, to go on, to talk about political prisoners.
Yeah, because here we are touching into what is actually the title of the seminar, or a subtitle, Time to Deal with the Russian Judicial System, still rooted in the Soviet KGB tradition. Deal with. How do we deal with that? I mean, we have been talking about how security services are tightening the grip, and it's becoming more violent. First, to the two of you who are, you don't live in Russia anymore, but what do you think is needed? What needs to happen?
Well, I think that, well, it's a big philosophical question, but I think big part of the problem that we have is issue with our national identity. I mean, the past, the history has been Russian ideology, real Russian ideology for the last 50 years at least. I mean, nobody believed in communism after Khrushchev, and Brezhnev came up with this idea that the memory of the Second World War might become the new Russian ideology. And actually, he invested a lot of effort in that, and that's exactly what we got. That's why we have so many celebrations and military parades and all that, and that is why it's so sensitive. But if you talk to ordinary Russians and ask them all these questions about the war, And at the end of the day, it's not only about sufferings and people killed, but it's also about the place of the country in the world. And well, even in my family and among my friends, it's a big problem how to understand what might be the place for such a huge country, which is, I mean, politically speaking, is not getting better, bigger, right? And that is a big problem for, I think, for many former empires, how to deal with this trauma. And unfortunately, I remember this moment after the protest when there was a big discussion about what might be more appealing for the middle classes. Putin's appeal to, well, we can restore national identity, we can give you back Crimea and Russian Empire and all that. Or say Navalny's appeal, which was all about, well, the country will be clean, there would be no corruption, everything would be fine, it would be kind of Europe. And for many people, even in the West, who try to assess what is more appealing, unfortunately, what Putin said sounded more appealing for ordinary people because it has this power, emotional power. Many people in Russia who want the country to be more democratic, we're struggling with this problem of future. What exactly we want to have? I mean, in Russia, it cannot be just want democracy. It's not. I mean, it's not that appealing because you need to make it to resonate it with the Russian society. Unfortunately, I'm not a philosopher. I cannot provide you with a solution. But the only thing I see this problem.
Anna, do you have something to add?
Well, difficult to discuss it when you don't live in Russia anymore, and when you made it choice. Well, what can we do, to my mind, in this situation, just to discuss it freely here or in some other free places and try to find ways how to help those who live there and who want to change something.
And expose it, like journalists do.
Yes, to talk about
like you
this.
do, and like Dmitrij has done.
And that's why this topic is extremely important for me as a journalist. I mean, this Stalin's repressions, and as Yuri Dmitriev said, each person's story is very important. It's extremely important. And I try, when I write an article, every time I'm concentrated on the person's stories. So this is a huge drama you can see in each story. And this is so important to tell. That it is not like millions, some mythic numbers, but exactly this story and that and that. And now you'll see what happened.
And it all comes down to human dignity. We have 10 minutes left, before I could continue, but I wanted to ask if there are any questions. Anybody who would like to raise something particular related to what has been said? Åge?
A question. I mean, you somehow touched upon the level of trust in Russian society, and for instance, that those people do not believe that Navalny was poisoned by the state. And I was just wondering, because several of the Russians that I know personally, they have had problems with corona, with the COVID infections, and some of them have died. I think that a number of Russian families must see the consequences of the pandemic very clearly. Is that somehow translated into any kind of discontent with the authorities, or is it just fate? That you are living in the time of pandemic and you have to experience it.
I don't know. Andrei?
Well, I think the biggest problem is we have this horrible problem of complete mistrust. Like the society just doesn't trust anyone. I mean, the society doesn't trust the politicians, they doesn't trust science, and especially they don't trust the authorities. So if somebody imposed on them, like vaccination, they immediately get it as a sign that it's just another example of repression and limitations, especially because there is no room for proper debate about Russian vaccines within Russian society. You cannot talk about that using normal arguments. You either, well, with the government or you are against it. And of course it creates a lot of room for conspiracy theories and all that. But actually at the end of the day it's all about our lack of trust.
It's ironic, isn't it? Because, I mean, at least one thing Putin did was to develop a vaccine. So actually there was a vaccine available, but then the population refused to take it.
Yeah, and that actually was part of his deal with the society, why he was so popular, because his idea was always to promote this mistrust. Like, if you want to have a change in the Russian society, you would need to elect some other people, but could you trust them? At least you know me. Of course I stole a lot, but you know me, and that means that maybe you have some trust in me. But all these other people, well, you cannot trust them, right? And that's exactly what is the answer. If you ask like an ordinary Russian about the possible political change, that would be like, well, we cannot trust them. That's it.
Yes?
But do they trust Europeans? Do they trust NATO? And also, I'm a bit curious about the situation developing now geopolitically between China and Russia. And I see things happening in Poland, of course, and we also see things in Turkey, where the leaders are being similar in many ways to what is happening on Putin's side in Russia. These are loose comments, and I don't really have any concrete questions, but I'm worried about what's happening in Europe and in the relationship between Russia and China in the area of oppression.
Wow. I can very briefly comment only on Russian-China relationship because I sort of investigated at least this angle. I cannot talk about Europe. But hopefully there's, in this area between Russia and China, it's much more complicated than we think. So we think that now we are dealing with this political military alliance. No, it's not that. Actually, what we have basically two forces. You have people in the Kremlin who are all eager to have a closer cooperation with China because they believe in many things and because it's, well, it would make them bigger and all that. But also you have security services, specifically the FSB, being extremely paranoid about China. And that is why we still have relatively free internet, because the FSB blocked all the Kremlin attempts to invite Chinese technical help to build a great firewall in the country. So sometimes this paranoia might be for good, actually.
Gunnar?
A lot of young, talented and well-educated Russians emigrate. And I guess they could be a counterforce against the misrepresentation of Western democratic countries by Russian media. Is that functioning? Are you, like you living in Finland, are you able to influence the picture of Western countries inside Russia? For instance, that we are not anti-Russians.
Well, let's ask those who live in Russia. Well, I can say that there is an interest in particular Finland in life and way of life in Russia. And I see this when we publish stories, and I write some stories connected with Finnish education system and healthcare system and so on, and there are huge numbers of readers. So I see this interest. We see this is in these numbers. What is it about? Is it just interest to compare life between Russia and Finland, or is it interest about the future? Because lots of people want to move, especially the last years. I see this interest among young people. They even wrote me and asked, how did you move to Finland? Because I'm kind of tired of living in Russia. Yes, but this is just examples. I cannot answer for all youngs and for all nations.
Inna? Yeah.
Yeah, just to give a statistics, one thing what authority says you should do, and as Andrei said, there is no trust, so we don't have to actually follow what they think. But what they're doing, during the last years, 4 million Russians immigrated. And it's also a huge number for, and they're not immigrating to China exactly, or to, I don't know, Central Asia, our friendly, I don't know how many countries are now friends of Russia, but not these countries, you know. And again, society is much more modernized. They use social media, TikTok, Instagram, and so on. So, and they don't want, they don't understand the regime, and they don't understand the language, and the gap is growing, and that's the problem. We're here. And the status quo, which the regime would like to take care of, is a huge problem for them, because it's also about how you actually deal with concrete problems as coronavirus. Every day, 35,000 people getting this disease, and around 1,000 die every day. If it had been an open war, and you would get these numbers, it's a lot of numbers. And this is again back to value of life. And people see that. People see that they are not being cared of state, of the regime. And this is the process when, this is of course a process which takes time, but at the same time, the discussion around what should be done, and we also see, as Andrei also said, that this KGB or FSB, they're all over, but at the same time they're not so smart. They're not, you know, they would not create some solutions. The only one purpose they have is to have a control. And this is not the way forward, and that's the problem. Regime lacks vision of future. And here comes again the civil society, which has this vision, and which also are very creative. Navalny is very creative. His people have been at least 116 million has watched his movie. Another question, of course, why people do not react. That's maybe to you. Why nothing is happening? That's also an interesting question. But at the same time, it's as if it's to be country. You know, it has to be. You know, it has been. It's like a food. It has to be. You have swollen it, but then it has to be proceeded through your body, and then you understand what have you actually swollen. So yeah. So I think maybe. Do you have an answer why people don't react after have been watching the movie of Navalny?
Well, lots of people. First of all, look, we have people being sent to jail for just posting something critical online for more than 8 years. Almost always chosen randomly, especially in regions. And people got that message that, okay, if you're in Moscow, in big city, if you have a high profile, you have good friends, probably that protect you. But if I'm just an ordinary guy living in Krasnodar, if I post something about Navalny, I can be sent to jail and nobody would care about me. And that was a message of the Russian authorities, and it was very successful, to be honest. Now people are really, really afraid, to be honest, to post something and to discuss things freely. To go to the streets, no, it's absolutely, I mean, the problem is that we have this zero tolerance of, you cannot resist Russian police on the streets. Even during Maidan, I remember that there was a room for maneuver. You can talk to people. I mean, you can talk to Berko to some extent. Of course, not to, I mean, when they fire, well, they shoot. But I mean, there was a room you can talk to them. It was always absolutely impossible in Russia. If you have Omon staying on the street and you are part of the manifestation, it means you cannot talk to policemen. Because if you engage them in some sort of conversation, that would provoke them to send you to detain you. So this means that there is no room for, especially for the young people, actually to resist or to develop some tools. They have only two options: to be completely silent and just to wait until being detained, or I don't know, to go to start a real bloody revolution, which is not an option.
I hate to end it here because that was very pessimistic. I would have rather ended by what Inna said, that civil society is developing and still could give some hope. And of course, no country is unchangeable. So in that, at least, there is something we can think about. Thank you so much for this very interesting viewpoints, and thank you for coming to this seminar. And thank you for the listeners on YouTube.